My husband's parents decided not to include me in their Thanksgiving plans because my children have disabilities, so I began pushing back. Once they understood all the support I provided for them, they started panicking and doing whatever they could to get me to reconsider. I never imagined the moment when my spouse's folks would stare right at me and declare that my kids were not allowed in their home. Let me clarify. With Thanksgiving just a couple of weeks away, my mother-in-law Janet spoke in a cunning, upbeat manner as she delivered the update. "Darling, we should talk about the Thanksgiving setup this year." For a second, I felt optimistic. I still longed for those family get-togethers, mostly since my twins, Zoe and Tyler, idolized their grandparents even with the increasing gap. "Absolutely, Janet. What's on the agenda?" There was this uncomfortable pause, just enough to make my gut sink. "Melissa, I'll be straightforward. We've caught wind of the gossip. None of us desire your kids near ours." I promise, my cheeks flushed with rage. You know, my twins are 9, and Zoe had been in an incident during a school outing. They were on a vessel, and their safety depended on the captain. Following the vessel's collision and my daughter's lasting brain injury, it came out that the captain was intoxicated. But rather than showing obvious physical impairments, she grew much more lively. Really lively. Like sleeping only 2 hours nightly and initiating food battles when idle. That kind of lively. After much consideration, I chose not to inform anyone. Her educators knew about it and kept it from the pupils. I believed it was the optimal approach because, well, kids can be cruel. But it went wrong. In a matter of weeks, numerous rumors about my precious daughter spread through the school, and the primary one was that she had somehow offered herself to outsiders for a weekend so I could buy a new vehicle, which I did acquire right after. And apparently the rumor reached my in-laws, since suddenly, sweet Janet was excluding me from the family event. We're attempting a new approach this year. You understand, something more elegant. I attempted to stay composed as I replied, "Oh, all right, so no children this time." But then she let out a big sigh before stating, "Pay attention, I'll be direct. We don't want your kids present, but carries are welcome, so get a sitter or stay home. Your choice." I inhaled deeply as I recalled all the favored sibling tales my husband, Brian, had shared about his sister, cranky Carrie. I suppose I didn't mask my disappointment effectively, because that's when junkie Janet remarked, "Chill out, you wild woman. It's not an assault on you." But she said it grinning, so it might seem like a sarcastic quip instead of malicious ridicule. I clenched my teeth until it hurt. This wasn't solely about Thanksgiving. It was how they consistently elevated Carrie's girls while viewing my kids as secondary. "No, Janet, if my kids aren't accepted, then neither am I." A thick quiet hung between us. Then Janet breathed out harshly, as if I was totally irrational. "Okay, suit yourself." She promptly exited my house, banging the door forcefully on her way out. I could hear my twins in the play area shrieking with joy as they constructed a sort of blanket shelter, totally clueless that their grandparents had just rejected them like bothersome animals. Drawing a deep breath, my mind whirled. I devoted my whole marriage to gaining my in-laws' acceptance, but at what price? No, I was finished with this charade. Janet and Richard had selected their path. Now it was my turn to choose, because they'd rue it faster than anticipated. The impact of Janet's statements hung around long after her departure. I always sensed my in-laws favored Carrie, but I'd persuaded myself it wasn't as blatant as it appeared, that underneath they cherished all kin equally. But that evening they'd stripped away any facade. They didn't bother concealing it now. They adored her offspring more than mine. Abruptly, a wave of laughter rang from the adjacent room. I looked to see Zoe and Tyler stretched out beneath their blanket structure, entirely unaware of the recent events. My chest hurt. They merited far better. I straightened up and entered the play area with a pretended grin. But as we cuddled on the sofa afterward, the fury within me wouldn't subside. I'd invested years attempting to blend into the Palmer clan, adhering to their implicit guidelines, wishing that with enough effort, they'd eventually regard me as Krusty Carrie's peer. But I was through striving. I passed the entire night scheming my response. I felt like a villainous strategist, and come morning my opportunity arose. It was ideal. I awoke to a message from Carrie. "Janet claims you're complicating Thanksgiving. Why must you always stir up trouble?" I gazed at the display, my teeth grinding. Naturally, Janet had already vented to her. "Me. So she informed you she barred my kids but accepted yours." The typing indicators showed, vanished, then showed again. "At last. She simply desires a calm meal, Melissa. You know your twins can be challenging." Challenging. As if they were a burden to tolerate, not cherish. Something inside me broke. Me, Have a wonderful, flawless Thanksgiving, Carrie. Exclude us entirely. I muted my device before she could reply. They didn't desire my kids at their valued table. All right. I wouldn't participate in their realm whatsoever, and they were on the verge of learning what that truly entailed. For years, I'd been their dependable resource. When Richard required assistance fixing his PC problems, he contacted me. When Janet needed aid organizing family occasions, I handled the communications and tasks. When they required someone to collect their medications, I was their initial contact. And Carrie, she was the adored sibling who contributed minimally while earning utmost acclaim. But if my kin wasn't sufficient for them, they wouldn't gain from my assistance any longer. A week prior to Thanksgiving, Janet phoned once more. I nearly dismissed it but chose to pick up. "Hello, Melissa," she uttered, her voice wary. "I'm just following up. I realize you were distressed, but I truly hope you'll rethink. We'd adore having you and Brian here, not you and the children, just you and Brian." I drew a deep breath. "I stood by my words, Janet. If my kids aren't accepted, I'm staying away too." She exhaled as if I was draining her. "I simply can't fathom why you're so obstinate. It's merely one night. You know how dear Carrie's girls are to us." And there it was. The ultimate stinging affirmation that my kids would never compare in her view. "You've clarified your stance perfectly," I stated evenly. "Don't concern yourself with us anymore. Melissa, don't be foolish." I terminated the call before she could complete. And this time I didn't feel like weeping. I began modestly. When Richard messaged inquiring if I could assist with his new printer setup that weekend, I ignored it. When Janet rang asking if I could fetch some items for her at Costco, I allowed it to voicemail. For years, I'd been their private aide, always accessible, always dependable. But no longer. It wasn't long before they observed. By Thanksgiving, I disregarded 14 calls and 7 messages. That morning, Carrie texted me again. "Mom and Dad are truly distressed you're ignoring them. Are you really going to allow this to spiral?" Me. It spiraled when they declared my kids weren't worthy of their table. She didn't reply afterward. I muted my phone and concentrated on my true kin. Zoe and Tyler were aiding Brian in stirring waffle mix at the counter. They were dusted in flour and chuckling wildly. This was our Thanksgiving, and for the first time in years, I felt utterly serene. But my in-laws weren't finished, and their following action would be unforgivable. Thanksgiving morning was tranquil in a manner I hadn't felt in ages. No hurrying to outfit the twins in clothes they despise. No worry over crafting a side that met Janet's criteria. No nervous checks of the time to ensure punctual arrival. Instead, we dwelled in our private world. Our residence brimmed with joy and the aroma of maple syrup and brewed coffee. Zoe and Tyler alternated assisting Brian in turning waffles, snickering each time he feigned nearly dropping one. For once, I was truly at ease. Then my phone began vibrating. I checked the screen. "Janet." I sent it to voicemail. It rang once more and again. Brian gave me a worried glance. "Need me to power it down?" I paused, then shook my head. "No, if it's a real crisis, I ought to know." I responded with a bland hello. "Oh, so now you answer," Janet grumbled. "I guess you're just lounging at home brooding while we're savoring a delightful meal. If you're calling to guilt me, I don't have the time. That's not my purpose." Her tone sharpened. "Did you terminate the Amazon subscription?" I stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Brian's Amazon Prime subscription, the one we've utilized for home goods and presents. It's indicating our payment is invalid." A chill awareness hit me. The Amazon subscription she mentioned wasn't Brian's. It was mine. 3 years back, when Janet griped about delivery fees, I'd included her as a family member on my Prime plan. I'd intended it as a short-term gesture, but they'd never discussed leaving it. And I'd overlooked it. "You mean my Amazon plan?" I said deliberately. "A break." Then Janet sneered. "Oh, don't be so trivial, Melissa. It's only a subscription. You earn well at that tech position. And we assumed..." "You assumed what?" My voice trembled a bit. "That you'd continue letting us use my Prime while informing me my kids aren't suitable for your Thanksgiving. Don't pretend this is a massive disloyalty. We're kin. The minimum you could do is share your perks." I breathed in sharply. "Are you for real? After clearly barring my kids, you still anticipated using my plan. Do you listen to your own words?" Janet released an overdone sigh. "This is precisely why we dodge tough talks with you. You always exaggerate. Exaggerate." I was through. "You're correct on one point," I said, my tone strangely steady. "I did revoke your access. And since we're being candid, let me be absolutely clear. You won't access any of my plans or aids again, ever." Janet inhaled sharply as if I'd struck her. "Melissa, don't be ridiculous. And on that note, don't anticipate further tech aid, medicine collections, or anything else. You chose when you barred my kids, and now I'm choosing. Quiet. Then in a tone icier than I'd heard from her, she said, "You'll rue this," and disconnected. I remained there briefly, clutching my phone so firmly my palm ached. Then I returned to my kin. Brian observed me attentively. All good. I forced a faint smile. Yes, just establishing some delayed limits. He didn't probe further. We devoted the remainder of the day to forging our own Thanksgiving customs, preparing homemade pizzas, engaging in board games, erecting a cushion fortress in the living area. For the first time in a long while, there was no hidden strain, no tiptoeing, no urge to be false. But I sensed this wasn't concluded. My in-laws wouldn't permit their handy assistant to simply depart, and their next step would expose their true nature. The quiet from my in-laws endured precisely 3 days. On Sunday, my phone displayed Carrie's name. After a brief pause, I picked up. "Hello? What on earth, Melissa?" She barked without introduction. "Mom just phoned me in tears because you severed them from all support. What's your issue?" I shut my eyes, squeezing my nose bridge. Did she also note they've been accessing my Prime for years without my awareness? A hesitation. "Well, she mentioned you were assisting them." I emitted a mirthless chuckle. "Carrie, they've purchased thousands worth on my plan without inquiring while handling my kids like lesser relatives. But yes, I'm the antagonist," she exhaled theatrically. "I understand you're annoyed, but totally disconnecting them. That's drastic. You mean like totally barring my kids from Thanksgiving while including yours? They just sought a serene dinner, Melissa. Mom says your kids can be quite rowdy." My hold on the phone strengthened, so they can exploit my Amazon plan. "But my kids aren't worthy of their valued meal. Understood. You're distorting it all." She moaned, "No, Carrie, I'm finally perceiving it all distinctly." There was an extended quiet, then her tone became scheming. "Perhaps we can negotiate. What if you maintain the Prime sharing but imposed restrictions? That way nobody suffers from a mere mix-up." I almost gagged. "Let me clarify. You want me to continue providing perks after they outright said they favor your kids over mine? They didn't intend it that way," she whispered. "They uttered it, Carrie, in those precise terms." She lacked a comeback. After a bit, her voice chilled. "Fine, if you insist on being this petty, that's your choice. But don't expect Mom and Dad to pardon you soon." I grinned. "I'll cope." For the following weeks, my in-laws attempted the cold shoulder. No communications, no messages. I assumed they hoped I'd eventually yield and return pleading for their endorsement as usual. What they failed to grasp was that for the first time in years, I no longer required it. And just as I believed they'd surrendered, they executed one final frantic tactic. It was mid-December when a formal envelope came. Brian discovered it in the post, scowling as he read the sender. "It's from my folks." I stiffened. "Wonderful. Guess what? Blame, coercion, or pure denial?" He offered an ironic grin. "Let's see." I ripped the envelope, my stomach plummeting as I perused the inside. Within was an official note with a detailed bill. I chuckled incredulously. This can't be real. Brian grabbed the note, reviewing it fast. "They're invoicing you for all the favors they've given us over time. PC assistance, childcare time, dinners they've prepared." His expression soured. "Are they genuinely trying to bill us for family ties?" Evidently they were. They'd carefully listed every single act they'd performed for us. Airport transports, times they'd supervised the twins, festive meals they'd organized. And at the base, a total sum, $64.75. I stared at the amount. "They truly believe I'll send them $6,000. Brian shook his head, clearly furious. "This is absurd. They must be in despair." I breathed out gradually, anger rising. This wasn't about funds. This was about dominance. One last, pitiful effort to drag me back into their sphere. I glanced at Brian, resolved. "I think it's time I visited your parents." The following afternoon, I drove to their residence solo, holding their ludicrous bill. When Janet opened the door, her face instantly stiffened. "Oh, so now you show up?" I raised the note. "You really thought this would succeed?" She folded her arms. "It's what's equitable." I laughed harshly. "Equitable? You want to charge me for standard family exchanges while assuming free use of my plans." Richard emerged behind her, appearing conceited. "We've provided much for your kin, Melissa, and now you're disconnecting us." I shook my head disbelievingly. "No, you disconnected us when you clarified my kids weren't adequate, when you exploited my kindness, when you priced family bonds." Janet's mouth tightened. "If you refuse to pay, perhaps we should pursue small claims court." I held her stare firmly. "Proceed." She blinked. "What? Sue me," I dared. "Attempt explaining to a judge why you're charging your daughter-in-law for holiday meals while using her Amazon without consent." See the outcome? They abruptly seemed unsure. Richard coughed. We just figured you'd want to rectify it. I laughed once more. Oh, I am rectifying it. I ripped the bill in two, observing their eyes expand. I'm finished as your aide and financier. Janet gasped, you thankless little. I turned and headed to my vehicle. Happy holidays, I shouted back, and for the first time in my wedded life, I felt utterly liberated. As I drove off, I grasped something vital. They weren't distressed about the favors or cash. They were distressed because for the first time, I'd reclaimed my authority and I wasn't relinquishing it. I assumed that after shredding their silly bill, my in-laws would finally retreat. That perhaps they'd wallow in their own conceit and recognize they'd overstepped. But folks like Janet and Richard don't evolve. They just intensify. It began with a message 3 days before Christmas. Janet, Melissa, this is becoming foolish. We're kin, you don't abandon kin over a small dispute. I disregarded it. The next day, another arrived. Janet, we've chosen to pardon you. Attend Christmas dinner and we can forget this. I almost burst out laughing. They pardoned me. Then one from Carrie. Carrie, they're truly suffering, Melissa. Just say sorry so we can proceed. I finally answered. Fascinating. They weren't suffering when they barred my kids or exploited my plans without permission. I think they'll endure. I blocked her after that. Christmas Eve came. Brian and I had completed adorning our tree and the twins were prancing in their coordinated sleepwear, too thrilled to calm. All seemed ideal. Then the doorbell sounded. Brian and I swapped glances. I knew who it was. I approached the door, inhaled deeply, and opened it. There they were. Janet, Richard, Carrie, and her spouse Mark, like a family mediation team. I crossed my arms. What do you need? Janet grinned with that phony warmth I'd learned to spot. We just wish to converse, not keen, I stated flatly. Richard exhaled deeply. Melissa, stop. You've proven your stance. Let's settle this before it escalates. I squinted. Escalates. What implies that? Janet glanced at Carrie. We don't want this impacting the kids. Her tone made my flesh creep. What do you mean? Carrie advanced, arms folded. Mom and Dad have consulted a family lawyer. A frigid surge of fear swept me. A what? Janet nodded, her eyes brimming with feigned worry. We're concerned, Melissa. You've isolated your kids from their relatives over a basic mix-up. That's unhealthy for them. My heart raced. What precisely are you proposing? Richard cleared his throat. We've explored grandparents' access rights. For a second, all I heard was my pulse thumping. Then I chuckled. Not a tiny laugh, but a boisterous, skeptical chuckle that surprised even me. They really believed they could lawfully impose their return into our existence. After all, Mark scowled. What's amusing? I dried my eyes. You're genuine. You think any judge would review this and support you? Janet's face stiffened. We've committed no wrong. No wrong? I echoed, stepping nearer. You deliberately barred my kids from family events. You used my plans without approval. And now since I finally resisted, you think you can menace legal steps. Richard's expression darkened. You don't want this path, Melissa. I returned his scowl with a cool grin. Actually, I do. I retrieved my phone. Consider carefully what you're menacing, I said softly. Because I possess every message, every recording, every transaction from my Amazon. I have evidence of it all, and I assure you, if you persist, you'll regret it. Carrie inhaled sharply. Melissa, please, no. I barked, gaze locked on my in-laws. You have zero grounds, you know it, I know it. And if you continue, I'll ensure all your acquaintances see your true selves. A strained, quiet descended. Then Janet's face twisted in fury. You're utterly irrational. I smiled. No, Janet, I'm finally holding firm. I retreated into my home and seized the door. Happy holidays, I said steadily. Then slammed it shut on them. They never pursued their weak legal menace. They knew they lacked substance. They knew they'd been defeated. In the ensuing weeks and months, I heard nothing from them. Not a message, not a call, zilch. And for the first time since wedding Brian, it felt like liberty. The burden of their critique vanished. The demand to fulfill their unattainable norms vanished. The perpetual loop of control vanished. 6 months on a balmy summer day, I lounged on our rear deck observing Zoe and Tyler frolic in their small pool. Brian passed me an iced beverage and sat next to me. It's been calm, he noted. I agreed. Yes, it's pleasant, he grinned faintly. Think they'll attempt once more? I drank my refreshment, viewing my kids chuckle as they doused each other. Irrelevant, I stated, because I'd already triumphed. I had my kids, my genuine kin, and I'd never permit anyone to make them feel undesired again.